Notification came at 6:47 on a Tuesday morning, and I almost missed it. I was already in my work truck, thermos between my knees, scrolling through the day's service calls when my wife's iPad, the one she'd left synced to my Google account by accident, lit up on the passenger seat. She'd asked me to charge it the night before because hers was dead. I was going to drop it by the university on my lunch break. The calendar alert read, RC Apt 4B, Birchwood, 11 a.m. Bring the good wine. I stared at it for a long moment. Diane didn't drink wine in the middle of the week. She was finishing her master's thesis. She told me every Tuesday and Thursday she had a 3-hour research seminar, back to back, no breaks. I set the thermos down very carefully. I'd been an electrician for 19 years. I was good at my job because I never assumed. You tested every wire before you touched it. You didn't guess. You verified. I took a screenshot of the calendar alert and drove to work. My foreman, Dale, was 62 years old, twice divorced, and had the kind of face that had earned every wrinkle. He was drinking bad coffee outside the supply warehouse when I pulled in. He took one look at me and said, "Who died?" "Nobody yet," I said. He laughed. Then he saw I wasn't laughing with him. We sat on the tailgate of his truck and I showed him the screenshot. Dale had a gift for silence when it mattered. He looked at it for a good 10 seconds before he handed the phone back. "Birchwood Apartments," he said. "That's the building on Clement Street. Graduate faculty housing. She told me she has a seminar from 10 to 1 on Tuesdays." Dale poured the rest of his coffee onto the gravel. "You want to go check?" It wasn't a question. "I want to know," I said. "There's a difference. Not much of one." He stood up. "Take the morning. I'll cover your first call." Birchwood Apartments was 12 minutes from the job site. I parked half a block down and walked. I wasn't running, wasn't hiding. I was a man walking down a sidewalk. I had 19 years of practice looking like I belonged somewhere. The building directory in the lobby listed apartment 4B under R. Cole. I knew that name. Professor Richard Cole. Diane had talked about him for 2 years. Her thesis advisor. The man whose recommendation letter would determine whether she got the research fellowship she'd been working toward. The man she described as brilliant, demanding, difficult to impress. I took the elevator to the 4th floor. I stood outside 4B and listened. My wife's laugh came through the door. The specific one she used when she was trying to be charming. I hadn't heard that laugh directed at me in over a year. I knocked. There was a pause. Movement. Hushed voices. The door opened, and a man in his early 50s stood there in a bathrobe, hair not entirely composed, a glass of white wine already in his hand before noon. He was the kind of man who wore reading glasses pushed up on his head like a crown. He looked at me the way men like him always looked at men like me, like I was there to fix something. "Can I help you?" he said. "I'm Marcus Webb," I said. "I think my wife is here." He started to say something. I didn't particularly want to hear it. I pushed the door open the rest of the way. Diane was sitting on his kitchen counter in a sweater I had never seen before, holding a matching wine glass. She looked at me and the glass actually slipped in her fingers. She caught it. Barely. "Marcus." Her voice was a sound I didn't recognize. "Hello, Diane." Professor Cole stepped between us with the confidence of a man who'd never been punched in the face. "Now, look, I think we all need to take a breath here. I'm completely calm," I said, which was true. I was eerily, almost frighteningly calm. "I'm not going to touch anyone. I'm not going to make a scene." I looked at my wife. "I just needed to see it." "This isn't what it looks like," Diane said. 19 years of marriage and she chose the most insulting possible response. "It looks like my wife is in her married professor's apartment at 11 in the morning with a glass of wine while she's supposed to be in a seminar," I said. "Tell me what it actually is." She didn't answer. I nodded slowly. I took one more look at the apartment, the second wine glass set out in advance, the throw blanket folded over the couch arm at a particular angle, the 2 plates in the drying rack, and I turned around and walked back to the elevator. She called my name twice in the hallway. I didn't stop. The drive back to the job site took 12 minutes. On the way, I made 2 decisions. The first was that I was going to be smart about this. The second was that I was not going to do anything I couldn't explain to my son. My son Eli was 19. He was a sophomore at the same university where his mother was finishing her degree. He played piano, hated mornings, and had my grandmother's eyes. He was the best thing I had done in my life, and I was not going to blow up his world until I understood exactly what kind of mess I was standing in. I told Dale what I'd seen. He listened, then said, "You need an attorney before you need anything else." "I know, not a general practice guy. A family law attorney." "I know, Dale. And you need to stop touching any joint accounts until you talk to one." I looked at him. "What do you know about joint accounts?" He gave me the look of a man who'd paid for 2 divorces. Enough. I called a family law attorney that afternoon. Her name was Sandra Cho, and she was recommended by a guy on my crew whose own divorce had gotten complicated. I got a consultation for Thursday morning. That evening, Diane came home at the usual time, made dinner, and acted like nothing had happened. I sat across the table from her and ate my food and said almost nothing. She tried twice to start a conversation about her thesis timeline. I answered in single sentences. She went to bed early. I sat at the kitchen table with my laptop and started reading about marital misconduct laws in our state. At 11:30, my phone buzzed. A text from Eli. "Dad, can you call me?" Not urgent, but kind of important. I stepped out onto the back porch and called him. "Hey," he said. He sounded careful, like he'd been thinking about what to say. "This is weird to bring up, but I've been sitting on it for a while and I think you should know." "Tell me." "I've seen Mom on campus. With Professor Cole. More than once. Not just, like, in the hallway. They were at the coffee place near the Humanities building together twice last month. The way they were sitting." He stopped. "I'm not saying I know for sure, but it didn't look like a thesis meeting." I closed my eyes for a second. My son had been tearing this alone. "Ely. Yeah. You did the right thing telling me." A long pause. "Is it bad?" "I went to his apartment this morning," I said. She was there. The silence on the other end lasted a full 10 seconds. Then, "I'm sorry, Dad." "Don't be sorry. You didn't do anything." "What you gonna do?" "I'm gonna be careful," I said. "I'm gonna find out exactly what's been happening, and then I'm gonna make sure I'm standing on solid ground before anything else." "Do you need me to?" "I need you to let me handle it," I said. "Go to your classes. Do your work. This is between your mother and me." He was quiet again. "Then she came to one of his graduate seminars 2 semesters ago. She told you it was a continuing education workshop for her thesis credits." "I was at that seminar. It was open to undergrads." She sat next to him the whole time. I wrote down the semester, the seminar, the date. After I hung up, I went inside and opened the folder where Diane kept our household documents. She'd always handled the paperwork. I'd always let her because she was organized, and I was not. I found the bank statements I hadn't looked at in 8 months. I sat down on the kitchen floor and I read every page. The pattern was right there once I knew what to look for. Transfers, always under $1,000, always on Fridays. Moving from our joint savings into an account I didn't recognize. 22 transfers over 14 months. In total, just under $19,000. I photographed every page. Sandra Cho was a small woman in her 40s who wore her hair pulled back and spoke like every sentence had already been considered 3 times before it left her mouth. She looked at the bank statements I'd printed and didn't react at all. "Does your wife have an independent income?" she asked. She was working part-time at the university library until last spring. She quit to focus on her thesis. "I've been covering everything." "Who pays her tuition?" I felt something shift in my chest. "I do. It comes out of my account every semester." "And these transfers?" Sandra tapped the statements. "Do you know where they were going?" "Not yet." "Find out," she said. "If marital funds were used to support an extramarital relationship, that's a significant factor in division of assets." She walked me through the legal landscape with the calm efficiency of someone explaining a circuit diagram. Our state considered marital misconduct in property settlements. If I could document that joint money had gone toward the affair, hotels, gifts, rent, I had leverage. "What about the apartment?" I asked. Sandra's pen paused. "Whose name is on the lease?" "His, but I want to know who's been paying it." "Get me bank records," she said. "Everything you can legally access, and do not move out of the house. Do not close any accounts yet. Do not confront your wife again until we've had a second meeting." I nodded. You came to me before you did anything irreversible, she said. That already puts you ahead of 90% of the men who walk through my door. I spent the next week being very quiet and very thorough. I was not a man who had ever thought of himself as strategic. I fixed things. I showed up on time. I paid what I owed. But I had also spent 2 decades tracing faults in systems, finding the one broken connection that explained everything else going wrong, and that skill transferred. Eli helped in ways I hadn't expected. He had access to the university's public course catalog and event records. He pulled Professor Cole's published schedule for the last 2 academic years and cross-referenced it against the dates on the bank transfer records. 14 of the 22 transfers happened on days when Cole had no scheduled classes or office hours. Days he could leave campus for hours without anyone noticing. He has a research stipend, Eli said over the phone one evening. It's public record. He's also on the ethics board. He won't be for long, I said. Dad. A pause. I found something else. Mom applied to audit his graduate seminar the same semester they started, not as a student, as a continuing education credit. She told the department she needed it for her thesis. There's an email thread on the university's public research portal. She cited his work 4 times in her thesis proposal. The proposal he approved. I wrote it all down. The account the money was going to turned out to belong to a property management company called Green Lake Rentals. I found this by calling the number on the back of the bank statement, explaining I was trying to verify a transfer and getting a confirmation reference that included a unit designation. Unit 4B. Birchwood Apartments. She had been paying Richard Cole's rent. I sat in my truck in the parking lot of the hardware store for about 10 minutes after I figured that out. Not from shock. I was past shock by then. Just from needing a moment to understand the full dimensions of what I was looking at. She'd been paying to keep him comfortable, with money I earned climbing into crawl spaces and running conduit in the heat. Money I had put away for Eli's last 2 years of school. I called Sandra. I found where the money went, I said. There was a brief silence on her end. Tell me. I told her. Forward me everything, she said. And Marcus, don't say a word to your wife yet. Diane came home the following Thursday with a new energy I recognized from early in our marriage. Bright eyes, a particular kind of restlessness. The way she moved around the kitchen like the walls were too small. She'd been to campus, probably to see him. She asked me about my day. I told her it was fine. She asked if I wanted to watch something after dinner. I said I had to look over some estimates. She watched me from the kitchen doorway for a moment. You've been quiet lately, she said. Long week. Are you okay? I looked up from my laptop. I've been better. She nodded slowly and went back to the kitchen. That night I slept on the couch for the first time, telling her my back was bothering me. She didn't argue. The next morning, I drove to Dale's house early and told him everything. All of it. The apartment, the bank records, the rent payments, the university ethics angle. He listened with his hands wrapped around a coffee mug and said nothing until I was done. You've been sitting on this for almost 2 weeks, he said. I needed to know what I had first. He nodded. Your attorney knows the financial piece? Everything. And your boy? He's handling it better than I expected. Dale set down his mug. What's the next move? The university has a Title IX and research ethics office, I said. A faculty member using an advising relationship to conduct a personal affair, especially when the student's thesis approval and fellowship recommendation are directly in his hands. That's not just personal misconduct. That's an abuse of institutional authority. Dale raised an eyebrow. You've done your homework. 19 years of fixing other people's problems, I said. You learned to read the system. I filed the complaint with the university ethics office the following Monday. I did it by email with a document attached, time-stamped bank records, the cross-reference schedule, the public course catalog entries, the thesis proposal citations. I didn't call Diane a victim. I didn't use loaded language. I just laid out the timeline and attached the evidence and let them draw their own conclusions. I also sent a copy to Sandra. The university moved faster than I expected. Within 4 days, Professor Cole was placed on administrative leave pending investigation. His access to the graduate advising portal was suspended. Diane's thesis was flagged for review by a second committee. I found out from Eli, who heard it from someone in his department, who'd noticed the professor's name disappear from the faculty availability board. That evening, Diane got a call that made her go very still at the kitchen table. I heard her say, "I understand," 3 times in a flat voice, then, "When?" Then nothing else for a while. She hung up and sat there. "Is everything all right?" I asked. She looked at me. Something moved behind her eyes. Not quite suspicion, not yet. "My thesis review has been delayed." "That's frustrating," I said. "What's the reason?" "Administrative," she said. "They didn't give details." I nodded and went back to my estimates. 2 days later, she knew I was involved. I don't know exactly when it clicked for her. Maybe it was the way I never asked follow-up questions about the delay. Maybe she noticed the bank statements missing from the household folder. Maybe Cole told her. She confronted me on a Wednesday morning before I left for work. "Did you file a complaint with the university?" she asked. "Yes." "Why?" I turned around from the door and looked at her. "Because a faculty member used his position of authority over a graduate student to conduct a personal affair, and that student's academic progress was directly contingent on his approval." "I wasn't coerced," she said sharply. "That's for the ethics committee to determine. You're going to destroy his career. He's doing a pretty good job of that himself. Marcus." Her voice shifted into something harder. "You don't understand what you've done. This affects my fellowship, my thesis, 2 years of work. You should have thought about that before you paid his rent with our savings." She went pale. The specific, high-contrast pale of a person who didn't know how much you knew until this exact moment. "I can explain that. Sandra Cho is my attorney," I said. "If you want to talk finances, she can be reached through her office." I went to work. Diane called me 4 times that day. I let them all go to voicemail. After the 4th, I texted Sandra a heads up and kept running cable through a commercial retrofit on the east side. Dale checked on me at lunch. He sat on a junction box and handed me half a sandwich without being asked. "She know the full extent now," he said. "She knows I know about the money. She doesn't know the rest yet. The rest being the statements going back 14 months. The statements going back 14 months. The sea lie factor. The fact that I have a copy of every document she thought was just sitting in a folder in the living room." Dale chewed. "You're calmer than any man has a right to be." "I'm angry," I said. "I'm extremely angry. I'm just not going to do something stupid with it." The divorce filing happened 2 weeks later. Sandra had prepared a complaint that included the financial records, the documentation of marital funds used to support the extramarital relationship, and a formal request for forensic accounting of our joint assets over the prior 24 months. Diane's attorney, a man named Jeffrey Marsh who wore pocket squares and had clearly been hired in a hurry, responded with a demand for half the house, 5 years of spousal support, and a share of my pension. Sandra's response was 3 pages long and referenced 4 separate instances of financial misconduct. The mediation session was held in a beige conference room downtown on a Thursday afternoon. Diane sat across the table from me. She'd lost weight. Her eyes were tired in a way I hadn't seen before. I didn't feel triumphant about that. I just felt like I was looking at a person I had known for a long time who had made a series of choices and was now sitting in the consequence of them. Jeffrey Marsh opened with the spousal support demand and the pension claim. Sandra set a folder in the middle of the table with the quiet authority of someone who had been waiting for this moment. "My client has documented 22 transfers of marital funds," she said, totaling $18,740, directed to a property management company servicing the apartment of Dr. Richard Cole, with whom Mrs. Webb was conducting an extramarital affair. Under state law, marital misconduct that includes the dissipation of marital assets is a factor in equitable distribution. Jeffrey Marsh looked at Diane. She looked at the table. "In addition," Sandra continued, "we have documentation suggesting that Mrs. Webb's academic advancement over the past 2 years was, at minimum, partially facilitated through a personal relationship with her thesis advisor, a relationship she pursued using time and resources that were understood to be directed toward completing a program funded entirely by my client." The mediation took 4 hours. Diane walked out with her personal belongings, her car, health insurance coverage to the end of the year, and a settlement that covered 6 months of living expenses, not 5 years. I kept the house, my pension, primary legal residency for purposes of any future decisions about Eli, though at 19 he made his own choices. As we wrapped up, Diane said quietly across the table. This isn't fair, Marcus. I looked at her for a long moment. You took $19,000 from the account I used to pay your son's tuition and gave it to a man who was writing your recommendation letters. You planned it carefully, and you ran it for over a year. What you got today is not punishment. It's just the accurate version of what you were pretending didn't exist. She didn't answer. Jeffrey Marsh packed his briefcase. Sandra shook my hand. I walked out into the afternoon and sat in my truck for a while before starting the engine. Eli texted while I was sitting there. How'd it go? I typed back. It's done. House is ours. Come by this weekend. His response came back in under 10 seconds. Already planning it. Dale said he'd make chili. I hadn't known Dale had talked to Eli, but somehow I wasn't surprised. The first 3 months after the mediation were quieter than I expected. I finished a long commercial job and took on a smaller residential contract that let me keep more normal hours. I repainted the kitchen because Diane had always wanted it yellow and I'd always thought that was too much. And now that it was my kitchen, I realized she was right. It was too much, and I painted it a clean white instead. Eli came by most weekends. We fixed the back fence and replaced the water heater and had long dinners that ended with bad television and better conversations than we'd had in years. Dale came by on Sundays sometimes. He and Eli argued about baseball with the intensity of people who care about very little else. Professor Cole was formally terminated by the university following the ethics investigation. The committee found that his advising relationship with Diane had involved inappropriate personal conduct and a failure to disclose a conflict of interest that materially affected her academic assessments. 3 of his other graduate students filed supplementary complaints after the investigation was made public. His tenure was revoked. I found this out from Eli, who told me with the specific satisfaction of a young man who had watched his mother be lied to and finally seen a corner turned. Diane's fellowship application was rejected. Her thesis committee required substantial revisions under a new advisor. Whether she finished the degree, I didn't know. That part of her life was no longer my business to track. What I did know was that she called me on a Sunday evening in October, 6 months after the mediation. I was replacing the bathroom faucet when the phone rang. I recognized her number. I let it ring twice, set down my wrench, and answered. Diane. Marcus. Her voice was different. Not the sharp performance voice from the mediation. Not the charming voice I'd heard through Cole's apartment door. Just her real voice, the one from a long time ago. I know you don't want to hear from me. What do you need? I need to talk to you. In person. Please. I paused. Eli's voice from months ago was in my head. She came to his seminar and sat next to him the whole time. And so was Sandra's. Do not do anything irreversible. And so was Dale's. You're calmer than any man has a right to be. All right, I said. Porch. Sunday. 11. She arrived exactly on time, which was always something she did. She stood on the front porch in a coat I didn't recognize, and she looked like someone who had been very busy pretending to be fine and was tired of the work of it. I opened the door, and we sat in the 2 chairs I kept out there. For a while, neither of us said anything. The neighborhood did its Sunday morning things around us. A dog being walked. A car leaving for church. The Hendersons' son mowing the strip of lawn between the sidewalk and the street. Richard isn't returning my calls, Diane said. I heard. His wife, apparently. She stopped. He's gone back to his family. I didn't know he had one until 3 weeks ago. I didn't say anything. I lost the fellowship, she said. The committee's official language was failure to maintain academic integrity in the advising relationship, which is their way of, I know what it means. She looked at her hands. I've been staying at my cousin's place. The new advisor won't sign off on my revisions until the spring semester review. I'm not sure I'm going to finish. I'm sorry about that, I said, and I meant it, specifically and narrowly. I was sorry about the degree, because she'd worked for it before everything else happened. She heard the precision in it. Marcus, she said, I made a terrible mistake. You made $19,000 of mistakes over 14 months, I said. And that's just the financial record. I know. She was quiet. I know. I'm not asking you to pretend it didn't happen. I'm asking if there's anything. She stopped again. Say it plainly, Diane. She looked at me. I want to try again. I sat back in my chair. The Sunday morning continued around us, quiet and indifferent. You want to come back, I said. I want to try. Counseling. Whatever it takes. I've thought about it and I think we could. You want to come back, I said again. Because the man you chose is back with his wife. Your fellowship is gone, your thesis is stalled, and you're sleeping on your cousin's couch. I said it without cruelty, just as a clear statement of the sequence. That's not wanting to try again. That's wanting a safety net. Her jaw tightened. That's not fair. You had 19 years of me being fair, I said. I was fair when I worked extra shifts so you could drop to part-time. I was fair when I signed every insurance form and tuition check you put in front of me. I was fair every single day while you were planning something else. People make mistakes. Diane. I said her name the way I said it when Eli was a teenager and had said something I needed him to hear clearly. A mistake is sending the wrong wire gauge on a residential job. What you did was deliberate. You planned it. You funded it. You maintained it for over a year while looking at me across the dinner table. She said nothing. I don't hate you, I said. I want to be clear about that. We had a real marriage for a long time before this, and I'm not going to pretend otherwise. But I'm not a contingency plan. I'm not somewhere to land when everything else falls apart. I'm asking you to forgive me. I do forgive you, I said. And it surprised me that it was true, but forgiveness and reconciliation are different things. I forgive you. I'm not taking you back. She sat very still for a moment. Then she said in a voice I hadn't heard before, lower with an edge in it. You think you're better than me now. You think, because you won the paperwork, you won something real. I think I know who I am, I said. I'm a man who showed up every day for 19 years. Paid every bill. Covered every gap. Never lied about a single dollar. You knew all of that when you made your choices. Whatever I have now, I've got it with my eyes open. She stood up. At the porch steps, she turned back. You're going to be alone. Maybe, I said. But alone with an accurate picture of myself is better than what I had. She walked to her car. I watched her go without moving from my chair. When she was gone, I sat there for a while longer. The Hendersons' son had finished the lawn and gone inside. The neighborhood was quiet in the way it got around noon before the afternoon got going. My coffee had gone cold. I went back inside and finished the faucet. That evening, Eli came by with Dale, who had in fact made chili, too much of it as always, in a pot large enough to suggest he'd been planning to stay a while. We ate at the kitchen table. My kitchen table. In my kitchen, with its clean white walls, and Dale and Eli argued about whether the designated hitter rule had ruined something fundamental about the game, a disagreement they'd been having since August without resolution. I ate my chili and listened to them and didn't say much. The argument was good-natured and circular and exactly the kind of problem that didn't require any strategy to solve. Later, after Dale had gone home and Eli was on the couch with his laptop doing work he'd brought along, I stood at the kitchen window and watched the last of the light go out of the sky over the neighbor's roof lines. I thought about a wire in a wall that looks fine until you put a meter on it. The reading tells you something that the surface never would. You could go your whole career touching wires without testing them and get away with it most of the time. Because most of the time the wiring is sound, but when it's not, when there's something fundamentally wrong underneath, you're glad you checked first. Hey, Dad, Eli said from the couch. Yeah, you doing okay? I turned from the window. My son was looking at me over the top of his laptop with his grandmother's eyes and a patience that was entirely his own. Yeah, I said. I think I actually am. He nodded and went back to his work. I turned off the kitchen light and went to check that the back door was locked and the house settled around me the way houses do at night. Small sounds, familiar weight, and it was mine. And it was honest, and that was enough.